about how Colby's demise evolved was that he was going to make a run at one of the big central reasons for the secrecy, which I'll get into in a moment. And that's the technology. This is a big science and technology story. Because imagine bringing out a technology that would sit on this podium, that would run your house, pulling energy from what's been called the zero-point energy field, that never has to be rebooted for fuel. It's pulling it out of the fabric of space-time. And it's estimated that every cubic centimeter of space in this room has enough energy to run the United States for a year, if you can tap it. And it has been tapped. So at the root of interstellar transport, aside from the transdimensional and anti-gravity, is the energy source. And the energy source is this amazing electromagnetic flux field. In fact, the early man-made UFOs were called flux liners because it's pulling energy out of this infinite ocean, this infinite sea, as Tesla called it. Professor Dirac called it the Dirac Sea, but it was this infinite field of energy that is at the root of space-time, embedded within space-time. And so bringing out something like that would, of course, immediately make oil, gas, coal, ExxonMobil, cars, internal combustion engines, jet engines, rockets, diesel, ocean liner engine, everything you can think of that we use would be obsolete and would be retired very quickly. Now, what I just named is several $100 trillion in mineral assets and infrastructure, because we also wouldn't need a public utility. Every car and home would be self-sufficient unto itself. I mean, it is a whole new world. Now, we could have had that world before I was born, and we don't have it yet. And as a result, we've decamped in the Middle East with our hegemony, and now we're facing World War III. So there are consequences to this kind of secrecy, unintended, and some are intended. But the unintended consequences are really about blowing back on us hard right now, both physically, geophysically, environmentally, geopolitically, and militarily. It's a very dangerous thing to thwart the development of normal technologies to be used for peaceful purposes. Now, that's the big caveat. Use them for peaceful purposes. Now, eventually, one of the things that happened along the lines of this was, how do we keep all this secret? Well, wet works kill people. Compartmentalization, unacknowledged special access projects, nobody outside the project knows. A big one is ridicule. I have a document from 1950s where they talk about engaging Disney Studios, which had done a lot of the OSS propaganda films in World War II. And Walt Disney was an asset of the CIA. And believe it or not, I mean, everyone thinks of cartoons, but so they engaged Disney Studios to make Flying Saucer and Little Green Men films, ha ha ha. And it ridiculed the subject so that respectable people would say, well, you're a kook if you're dealing with UFOs and the ET issue. And that was done deliberately, and this was part of what I referred to in that earlier document, the psychological warfare value of the subject. How do you create the psychological nexus so that the subject becomes subject non grata? Like a persona non grata. It's a subject non grata. It's unwelcome. It has ridicule associated with it. And an Air Force major told me, who's one of our Disclosure Project witnesses, who was present when we shot and killed an ET on the tarmac at McGuire Field there in New Jersey. His testimony is quite riveting if you've read the materials. And he was saying, look, really the way this has been kept secret more than anything is just sheer ridicule. Nobody wants to be laughed at. Everyone's concerned what their friends might think. Because, where's the tinfoil hat you're supposed to be wearing? So this ridicule got ramped up in 1953 in the psychological warfare programs. So by the time, we came on the stage, we're 50, 60 years into a hole of ridicule and denial and countermeasures and everything else that, how do you fix this? It's very difficult because most reporters and media people don't want to be ridiculed. Nor do scientific and people and professors and government folks. I mean, there's so many people in the Congress I've met with, very interested, know this is real. I'll say, will you hold a hearing on this? They go, oh, no. It'd be the end of my career. I'd be the laughing stock. I'd be Senator Moonbeam or Congressman, you know, Tinfoil Hat or whatever. So that ridicule, which was ramped up in the 50s, has been very effective, incredibly effective. And that's one of the hard problems I've faced as well. Although, you know, as a medical doctor, luckily I was known as a very good emergency doctor before I got on Larry King Live and started doing stuff like this. But if it had been the other way around, I probably would have never been hired. Really, yeah, so I was careful in my timing because I did have a family of 4 children to support. Luckily, they're all out of college now. So, now the next thing I want to, if the next document, if you move on from Marilyn Monroe's tragedy, and there will be time at the end of today for you to ask questions. I'm sure your mind must be swirling by now about a lot of things. And this is the next document is the Peterson Memo, Arlington Institute. So this is the meeting that never happened with me and the CIA director. Very interesting. Look at the date. 3rd of December, 1993. The meeting between me and the sitting CIA director was the 13th of December, 1993. And is that document up? And the CIA director, R. James Woolsey, who, when information about my meeting came out after he had left office, denied it ever happened. Luckily, I could call him in a flat-footed lie. I always tell people in Washington, how do you know these politicians and lawyers are lying? Their lips are moving. If their lips are moving, they're lying. I know it's a very cynical thing to say, but unfortunately very true. But this document, which I'm not going to go all the way through, but some of the information is very, very important. I talked to Woolsey this morning, and he suggested getting together, underline, his underline. Project Starlight that's referred to here was the coalition I put together before the Disclosure Project, which no one knew about, where I was trying to get the President Clinton, to lead the disclosure on this. And it's a very interesting document because on the second page it says, remember, the most powerful people in the world will have a deep, compelling interest in our activities and will use everything in italics at their disposal to effect their objectives. Very threatening. And then he suggests that I get an encrypted portable phone because my kitchen doesn't have one. I mean, the whole thing is like such. Now here I am, of course, you know, I'm like 30-some years old, I'm an emergency doctor, and I'm being asked to come up and brief the sitting CIA director because, and if you read this carefully, it states in there, he's made inquiries and no one's telling him anything. This is the sitting director of the CIA. This is the proof the meeting took place. Now, there is other proof. Now, what the hell is going on that a sitting CIA director doesn't know anything about the most top secret CIA project? Illegal, outrageous, unconstitutional, criminal. And when I found this out, now remember, this is 22 years ago almost, it was a shock to me. Because I was raised like most people. I thought, you know, well, there's a president, there are all these spooks, and there's a chain of command, and it operates. I didn't know about unacknowledged special access projects. I certainly could not have imagined that the man who puts together the presidential daily briefing would be kept secret on stuff that I had collected unbelievable amounts of evidence for, the existence of UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, et cetera, and so on. But that was the case. And when I met with this man for nearly 3 hours, it became quite clear to me that it was not a prevarication. I really thought that he was saying that just as a way of blowing me off, or, not blowing me off, but sort of saying, I want to meet with you to find out what you know, but I actually do know, and I'm going to pretend like I don't know. No, this man, and my wife can attest to this, was shaken to his foundation. The cover story for the meeting was a dinner party, and they're in the D.C. area, which is typical. The wives were invited as cover. Terrible thing to say, but it's true. So my wife was there, I was there. The CI director and his wife, who's Chief Operating Officer of the National Academy of Sciences, was there, and my host, John Peterson, and his wife. Interestingly, she didn't know who was coming to dinner until that afternoon. He wouldn't tell her. And then she finds out like 2 hours before we appear, there's this UFO expert and the CIA director and his wife coming for dinner. Can you imagine being that wife? That was I'm sure that night was an interesting conversation after we all left. But that's how these things are done. The real tragedy of it, though, is that if you have a breakdown in government this severe, those of you who are students of governance, where you can have a CIA director or senior members of the military who are being left out of something very important and which hundreds of billions of dollars per year are going into, then you have no government. So the deep national security state from 1950s until today has devolved into this sub rosa, unacknowledged, not international, transnational entity with representation in the UK, Canada, Australia, Brazil, China, Russia, former Soviet Union, which on this issue work together like this. It is not responsive to the body politic. It is not responsive to the heads of government or even the heads of committees and cabinet level people. There are some cabinet level people, however, who have known. I mentioned a few. There was a CIA director known as George H.W. Bush, and the CIA headquarters is now named after him. He was a member and is a member of MAGIC. But then there are others like Woolsey who wouldn't be told anything. Some presidents have been given a little information, and some have been told nothing. Why? Well, here's how it works. It took me a long time to figure out something very simple. I call this a soul biopsy, because doctors are talking about biopsies, but it's a psychological analysis. So let's say this gentleman is the incoming director of the CIA. The outgoing director of the CIA is me. As incoming director of the CIA, they've taken your life apart, and they know what your values are. If your values are that you would not go along with an illegal, criminal, unconstitutional effort and engage in assassinations that were illegal and other things, they will never tell you about this. And even if you're the president that's incoming, this is what happened to Jimmy Carter, and I know this for a fact. Jimmy Carter got elected, and the outgoing CIA director was, guess who? George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush, when he was called in and they had the transition meeting for between November and January when they have the transition and they're standing up the new cabinet, was asked personally, face-to-face, by Jimmy Carter, and I met with someone who was there, about the UFO issue. And Bush said, I'm not going to tell you, in a very derisive way, about that. Go see if you can get it from the Congressional Research Service. Literally. Brushed him off. And Carter was stunned, because Carter had had a UFO sighting when he was governor of Georgia. I have his report form that he filed officially, signed Jimmy Carter. He ran in 1976 on ending UFO secrecy, actually. So he put together a White House study on